It was a dark and stormy night, cliché as it sounds, but that's how these things usually start, ain't it? I was driving alone on a lonely road, rain hammering down on my windshield like an angry drumbeat. The wind howled like a banshee, and my headlights were barely cutting through the thick fog. Man, I should have stayed home and watched a horror flick instead. I was just about ready to call it quits and turn back when I saw her, a young woman standing on the side of the road, soaked to the bone, and looking like she'd seen a ghost. I felt bad for her, you know? No way was I gonna leave her out there in that mess. So, I pulled over and rolled down my window. "Hey, need a ride?" I yelled over the raging storm. She nodded, her face pale as a ghost. "Thanks, mister. My car broke down, and my phone's dead. Can you give me a lift to the nearest gas station?" "Sure thing. Hop in," I said, unlocking the doors. She climbed into the back seat, and I noticed how cold the air got all of a sudden. A chill ran down my spine, but I shrugged it off as the weather. Nothing more, right? As we drove, I tried making small talk to break the tension. But she barely said a word, just stared out into the darkness. I figured she was scared or something, what with the storm and all. But then she spoke, and her voice sent shivers up my spine. "You shouldn't have stopped for me," she said, her words hanging heavy in the air. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror, my nerves on edge. "What do you mean?" She looked right into my eyes, and I swear they glowed like a pair of fiery coals. "I'm not what you think I am. I must have imagined it, right?" Yeah, the storm was playing tricks on my mind. But just to be safe, I stole a glance back at her again. Only this time, she wasn't there. The back seat was empty, no sign of her anywhere. I swerved the car to a halt, heart pounding like a jackhammer. Where the heck did she go? I mumbled to myself. Then, out of nowhere, a cold hand touched my shoulder. I yelped and spun around, and there she was, the girl, but now she looked different. Her skin was pale as death, and her eyes were empty, like two black pits. She grinned, but it wasn't a friendly grin, more like the grin of a hungry predator. "Thanks for the ride," she whispered, her breath icy against my ear. I couldn't move, frozen in fear as she disappeared into thin air. I gunned the engine and peeled out of there like a bat out of hell, not caring about the storm or the road ahead. I just wanted to get away from that ghostly hitchhiker. But the crazy thing was, she didn't leave me alone. Oh no, she started appearing in my rearview mirror, standing by the side of the road whenever I passed. Every time I saw her, my heart skipped a beat. She was haunting me, no doubt about it. I tried to shake her off, drove faster, took different routes, but she was always there, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. I started losing sleep, jumping at every little sound, convinced she was out to get me. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront her, face my fears head on. So, I drove back to where I first picked her up. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with tension. I waited, and sure enough, she appeared in my rearview mirror, just standing there in the distance. With trembling hands, I got out of the car and faced her. "What do you want from me?" I yelled, my voice shaky. She didn't say a word, just stared at me with those empty eyes. Then, in a voice that sent chills down my spine, she whispered, "I want what you took from me." I was confused, didn't know what she was talking about. "Took from you? I don't understand." She pointed towards my car, and when I turned around, I saw it. My back seat, the very spot she'd been sitting, was now covered in mud and water, like she'd just come in from the storm. "I died out there, on that rainy night," she said, her voice haunting and filled with sorrow. "You picked me up, but you didn't stop to help. You drove on, leaving me stranded. And now, I can't move on. My heart sank, and I felt a deep pang of guilt. I remember that night, seeing her drenched and scared, but I hadn't taken the time to offer real help. I had just assumed she needed a ride, nothing more. "I'm so sorry," I choked out, tears welling up in my eyes. "I didn't know. I wish I could go back and change things." She reached out, and for a moment, her hand felt warm, like a comforting touch. "You can't change the past, but you can learn from it," she said softly. "Remember me, and don't turn a blind eye to those in need." With that, she vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. From that day on, she never haunted me again. But I'll never forget that encounter, a chilling reminder to be kind and compassionate. I never believed in creepy clowns or all that boogeyman stuff. I mean, they're just folks in colorful suits trying to make people laugh, right? But that night, as I stood alone on the deserted street, everything I thought I knew turned upside down. It was a cold, misty evening, and the eerie silence engulfed the town like a suffocating blanket. I was on my way home, my footsteps echoing through the empty streets, when I heard a faint sound of laughter in the distance. I shook it off, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then the laughter grew louder, more menacing, and seemed to be coming from all around me. Out of nowhere, a spotlight flickered to life, illuminating a circus tent that hadn't been there before. The sight sent chills down my spine. "Whoa, what the heck?" I mumbled to myself. I couldn't resist the eerie allure of the circus, so I approached with trepidation. As I stepped under the crimson and gold-striped canopy, the laughter intensified, making my skin crawl. The air reeked of popcorn and cotton candy, but something was off about the smell. It was sickly sweet, almost nauseating. I pressed on, drawn deeper into the heart of the circus. Inside, I found myself surrounded by creepy clowns, each one more horrifying than the last. Their makeup was grotesque, with distorted smiles that seemed to stretch forever. But the worst part? Their eyes. Soulless and hollow, they stared straight into my soul. Every step I took, the clowns followed, their laughter growing louder and more frenzied. Panic welled up inside me, urging me to flee, but I was frozen in place. They encircled me, their painted faces mere inches away, their laughter echoing in my ears. "You thought you could escape," one of them hissed, the grin on his face twisting into something sinister. "What do you want from me?" I stammered, my heart pounding like a drum. But they didn't answer. Instead, they lunged at me, their razor-sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. I barely dodged their attacks, stumbling backward in horror. "You're the entertainment now," another clown snarled. I ran for my life, the laughter echoing in my ears, driving me to the brink of madness. I couldn't find the exit. It was as if the circus itself was mocking me, shifting its layout to keep me trapped. My breaths came in gasps, and the world spun around me, a nightmarish carousel. Finally, I burst through a tent flap and stumbled out into the cold night air. The laughter abruptly ceased, and the circus vanished, leaving no trace it had ever existed. I collapsed to the ground, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had just happened. And that's when I saw it. A small, tattered flyer lying at my feet, announcing the circus's return the following year. I shuddered at the thought of anyone else falling victim to their malevolent games. But something compelled me to pick it up, and as I did, a haunting realization dawned on me. The flyer was dated 1923. My heart pounded even harder as I looked back at the empty space where the circus once stood. It wasn't just a circus, it was a cursed nightmare, trapped in time, and it had been claiming victims for decades. That night, I couldn't sleep. The laughter still rang in my ears, and the images of those bloodthirsty clowns haunted my dreams. The circus would return, and it would claim more innocent souls. Okay, I gotta admit, I've never been a believer in all that supernatural stuff. Ghosts, spirits, and haunted houses? Nah, not my cup of tea. But then, that night happened, and my skepticism went out the window. It was a dark and stormy evening, typical horror movie material, I know. My friends and I were bored out of our minds and looking for something to do. That's when Mark, the thrill-seeker of our group, suggested we mess around with an old Ouija board he found in his grandma's attic. Dude, are you serious? I said, chuckling nervously. Ouija boards are creepy as hell. But Mark insisted it'd be fun and that there's no harm in trying. So, we gathered around the dining table, candles flickering, and placed our fingers on the planchette. I thought it was just a silly game, nothing more. Is there anyone here with us? Mark asked with a dramatic flair. At first, nothing happened. We all exchanged skeptical glances, ready to call it quits. But then, the planchette started moving. It was slow, deliberate, and there was no way any of us were pushing it. Who's doing this? Sarah asked, her voice quivering. It's not me, Mark exclaimed, wide-eyed. The planchette continued to move, spelling out a name, Sam. Sam? Is that your name? I asked, trying to keep my cool. The planchette slid to YES. What do you want, Sam? Mark inquired, his curiosity getting the better of him. The board spelled out a chilling message, GTOUT. That was enough for me. Okay, this is getting too real. Let's stop, I said, feeling the unease gnawing at me. But before we could remove our fingers, the planchette shot to NO. Come on, guys, it's just a prank, Sarah said, trying to dismiss the eerie feeling settling over us. We reluctantly continued, and the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing minute. It was like an invisible presence had wrapped its cold fingers around our hearts, squeezing tighter and tighter. Suddenly, the planchette spelled out a cryptic message, DIE. That was the last straw. We jerked our hands away, but the planchette didn't stop moving. It flew off the board and crashed against the wall, shattering into pieces. A chilling silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of the rain tapping against the windows. We should never have messed with this thing, I said, my heart pounding in my chest. But it was too late. The room grew colder, and a soft, eerie humming filled the air. The lights flickered, and the atmosphere became suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd awakened something malevolent. And then it happened. The lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in, and we fumbled for our phones to use as flashlights. But when the screens illuminated the room, I wish they hadn't. In the corner, standing amidst the shadows, was a figure. It was tall, with long, bony fingers and glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. I couldn't make out its face, but its presence sent shivers down my spine. Guys, do you see that? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, the figure moved, gliding closer to us without making a sound. It was as if it was floating above the ground. Run! Mark shouted, and we all bolted for the door. As we rushed out of the house, I could feel a cold breath on my neck, and I knew that thing was right behind us. The rain poured down, making the ground slippery as we stumbled through the darkness. Finally, we reached the safety of the streetlights, and when we turned back to look at the house, the figure was gone. But its presence lingered in our minds, and we knew we had encountered something beyond our understanding. From that night on, none of us could explain what happened. We vowed never to touch a Ouija board again, and the memories of that terrifying encounter haunted our dreams. But one thing remains certain: there are some things in this world that we should never mess with. The Ouija board opened a doorway to an unfathomable horror, and we were lucky to escape with our lives. So, if you ever come across an old Ouija board in an attic or a dusty old shop, remember my tale. Leave it be, and pray that you never awaken the malevolent spirits lurking in the shadows. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some doors should never be opened.